Welcome, Dimitri. It's a pleasure to have you here and to be talking to you about your work with auras, among other things. Maybe you could start from a very base level by explaining to someone who may have no idea whatsoever what auras are.
Okay, great. Great. Well, thank you for having me on for this webinar and webcast. I appreciate you bringing me on here and also for being part of Theosophy. I admire the organization a great deal and all the work through the years going back to the founders, right? Blavatsky and that great era. So auras have been part of spiritual study really from the beginning of time. But it's been more recent that there's a greater awareness of auras. So an aura basically, there's kind of three ways that we have defined the auric field. It is a vibratory essence that surrounds all living things. So we have our physical body, we have the radiations of our physical body, but within the body, there's a spiritual component to it. And that's radiating its own energy, its own spiritual power. And that power we call the aura. And the reason it's so important is it's the foundation of our physical body, ourselves, and also the physical world. One of the things we teach, a basic thing is that everything we see in the physical world was first created in the spiritual world and born of it, so to speak, but it's also constantly being sustained by it. So the power from those spiritual dimensions is feeding the physical world, is feeding us and all of it. So that all shows up in the auric field. Now, another definition we give of the aura is it's the energetic blueprint of the soul. And this means that everything that we're expressing, everything that we're doing, everything that we're feeling, everything that we're thinking is radiating an energy in the auric field. So the aura, let's say, one color. We have many dynamics going on with us at the same time in our life and our consciousness. And all of that is showing up in the auric fields. And it shows up in particular colors. Another thing that's so fascinating is that, and here I'm not talking about like reflective light, but our aura has fathomless colors, and all these colors have certain meanings. So understanding how to work with the energies, because that's our work, is not just that you have an aura, but how can you develop it? That's the big key. You're enhancing these auric colors. And another definition we give of it is it's the individual expression of the universal life force. So you can say that the power that's powering the energy field isn't only just coming from us, it's coming through us. So since none of us express the universal life force exactly the same way, no two auras are alike. So if someone is very creative, they're going to draw in those universal life energies. If someone's very scientific, they'll bring in other types of energies related to the activities that they're doing. So between these kind of three definitions, it gives us an understanding that we have this incredible spiritual foundation that is commonly called the auric field.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Well, that concept, connecting auras with colors, goes back to some early theosophical work, like the
Right.
thought forms of Besant and Leadbeater.
Right.
And they had their own picture of what colors were associated with what characteristics or feelings. Could you say a little bit about your system?
Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
does a color mean, a given color mean in your system?
Well, that's a fascinating study, and it does go back to the Hermetic sciences and yes, clairvoyant observation. But so there's the color, and then there's the shading of the color, and there's also the placement of the color in the energy field. Now, here when we use the word color, we're kind of paraphrasing really color energy. So these are spiritual powers that are coming through in color. Now, for example, if a brilliant emerald green, kind of like the jewel, that indicates somebody with a lot of harmony, with a lot of balance, with a lot of steadiness. So if that's seen around the mental area, that shows mental stability. This person doesn't, you know, get thrown very quickly. If it's around the heart, it means that their world affairs, they've got kind of their house in order. Maybe not everything's working perfectly, but they seem to keep an even keel. If it's around the abdominal area, it shows sort of emotional balance. This person doesn't get riled up too easily. Now, if the shade degrades down to what we call, let's say, an avocado green, like the outside of an avocado, very dark, and also this is a kind of a dirty energy. It's very unpleasant. This means something entirely different, that this could be a deceitful person, or it could also mean that this is a person that's very jealous. And Barbara used to joke, don't buy a car from someone wearing avocado green. They'll try to cheat you. So the beauty is you can't hide who you really are in the auric field. So if you're upset or you're angry, you may say, no, I'm fine. I'm not upset. I'm not angry. But if you are, that's going to show up in the auric field. So we tell people, and when you're training, it's not key to see the aura, but it's key to understand you. So if you do have a jealous bone about something right now, well, you may be generating some of that avocado green, and you want to get rid of that. You want to let it go. So all these beautiful shades have their meaning, but then we can sometimes misexpress the energy, let's call it that, and it starts to move down to a lower. An example of that would be lemon yellow. It's a very brilliant, pristine lemon yellow, often seen around the head area. This shows a strong intellect. This shows someone that can focus on a subject and really stay with it and learn it to the nth degree. And anybody teaching or learning something would want to work a lot with that lemon yellow power. But let's say, for example, that person becomes a couch potato or does a lot of, drugs or something that just depletes that mental power and energy. That lemon yellow is going to decrease. It's going to go down to what we call the creamy mustard energy. And this means somebody that's very confused. They can't put their attention on anything for more than a very brief moment. Again, all that's shown in the auric field. It's all there. And the point is you can turn these things around. If I notice, gosh, I don't focus very well. I can't really keep my attention on something for very long. Well, again, the mind is like a muscle. So, okay, maybe that part of the muscle is not very strong, but you can strengthen it. Gosh, even today, there are apps on your phone for building up powers of concentration, right? But you'll have to exercise the mind to do that.
Well, you seem to be speaking of two things. One seems to be a more kind of background color to the aura, that is to say, something more consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And you also seem to be saying that flashes of moods can affect the aura and can be seen. So to what extent is a given person's auric color likely to be stable, and to what extent is it likely to vary, switch on and off on a
Right.
moment by moment basis?
That's a great question because some people have a little bit of a cartoon picture of the aura. So they'll say, "Oh, don't talk to me today. My aura must be black. I'm in a bad mood." No, it
Mhm.
doesn't just like switch from one to another. We'd be in disaster shape if that happened. So exactly what you're saying. There are parts of the aura that do change their, if you want to use the word ephemeral, they do change with our thoughts and feelings as they're going on. And others show a tendency of thinking and feeling, a tendency of energy. So let's say I may have an energy of love that's very dominant, but yeah, I have a bad day and I get really mad and upset and things are, maybe I get unreasonably angry at somebody and that flash of dark vitiated red will show up. But as you're saying, the foundation is still love, and that person will get over it and then probably say, oh, I was so stupid to get so upset about that. But we know sometimes there are people, they're almost in a constant state of rage. They're almost in a constant state of anger. So their energy, their atmosphere, as you say, sort of is not so wonderful. They may have these great moments where they are calm, but they've got to work on that because as they, again, use their own self-discipline to realize, boy, I really am a hothead here. I've got to control this. As they start to do that, or as that person starts to do that, then the atmosphere itself will change. So some parts of the aura change literally with our thoughts and feelings. Some change more gradually, and some change over the course of our lifetime. The very foundational energies, kind of part of the auric shell, that will take, decades to change. And look, we know that too, right? We may have a quality we're trying to redeem. Maybe we're not very patient. And we know that, but it could take years to develop that patience. And that means that energy is slowly, slowly, slowly getting stronger. But the beauty is, as you get it strong, it starts to become a part of you. And then it's part of what, shall we say, the eternal you. I know I don't know if we're going to get into reincarnation today, but the idea is, you're building not just for this incarnation, not just for this lifetime. So everything you're doing that's adding to you is adding to life. Barbara's motto was, your passport to eternity is the light you earn. Because the auric power we are going to take with us to the other side. We're not going to take our fame and fortune to the other side, but we are going to take our light. So that is the most precious thing you'll have. So that's also the most important thing to build up in your auric field and express it in your life.
Great. Thank you. Well, one things you do, I gather, is you train people to see auras. Could you say a little bit how you go about that?
Well, actually, we don't actually train to see it. We train more to work with it. So, in other words, now some come in because they've had experiences of seeing, flashes of color or different things going on, and they're trying to understand how to work with it. But generally, what we say is things like clairvoyance are a byproduct of the evolutionary process. Now, like any talent, some people kind of are born with it to a certain degree, although it has to be developed. Even though Barbara was born with it, she spent decades developing it in terms of being a trained clairvoyant. Those are two very, very different things. But the point is the auric energies are in you now. If you start working with them now in terms of evolving your soul, you're going to feel and get into their presence. Everybody can pick up on vibes, right? In terms of, so, okay, while I would walk in a room and I just enjoy talking to this person, while I may be picking up the good energies that they're projecting, I don't necessarily see them, but intuitively I am picking them up, and that's creating this very harmonious reaction. Same thing, I may be in another situation where somebody seems to be, fine, but I'm getting this repelling feeling, and because I'm picking up some not so pleasant energies from them. So we do have to listen to our intuition and kind of respond to that. But in our work, the most important thing is to develop the aura. You're never stuck with an aura the way it is. It is the fuel of your evolution. And our work is really about, helping to evolve the soul. And the aura is one of the very key components. This also happens to be the foundation of the meditation work we do, because we meditate with divine light.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that leads to a question I was going to ask. I mean, it seems fairly clear that very few people see auras visually, that is clairvoyantly. But on the other hand, almost everyone seems to perceive these auras kinesthetically, which is
Yes,
kind of what you're talking about. Like,
exactly.
that guy gives me the creeps,
Right,
I really like being around that person.
right.
So in this case, would you say that when ordinary people are going through life this way with these kinds of perceptions and responses, they are responding to auras?
Absolutely. And the other thing we have to remember is we all have the clairvoyant apparatus. Every single person on earth does. And it doesn't, like you said, for many it is latent, but it's there. But even latent, they're still active. So it's still the same spiritual senses that are picking up that icky feeling or that happy feeling. It's just the bridge between the two dimensions hasn't yet been built. It is a skill that, if it's its time, that can be learned. But again, it's learned as part of an overall process. So we like to say, look, we're all mystics in the making, whether we cross those higher bridges of awareness in this incarnation or the next one or whatever, we're all going to get there because it's actually part of our anatomy. It's part of who we are and part of what we're doing. And if we've had the spiritual calling, like I'm sure most people who are going to watch this are on a path, it means they've already had an inner mystical prompting, and maybe many more than one, that is telling them, again, they may not have words to it. You know, when I first had my awakening, I didn't have words for it, right? But I knew what I was experiencing. And then you start to put words and understand, oh, this is a whole process teaching. You know, it's as Bless used to talk about the mystery schools in the ashram. You know, this is where you used to learn all this stuff. Actually, Theosophy was one of the first to bring some of this hidden knowledge into more public awareness. That was titanic at the time, right? That was groundbreaking. I mean, yeah, at the beginning of the 20th century, if you were a forward-thinking person, you were most likely a theosophist, right? Because you were trying to understand that there are deeper dimensions to life. I love the story that they say even Einstein kept this copy of The Secret Doctrine on his desk. So he was understanding that there was something more going on. I mean, he was trying to give it scientific expression. I mean, mathematical expression, right? Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe you could tell us, let's say a client comes in, wants to see you about some, shall we say, auric dysfunction.
Hmm.
Uh, how would you work with this person on a roughly step-by-step basis?
Right. Well, we used to do privates. I'm doing mostly teaching work right now.
Mhm.
So in the teaching world, we have kind of a, shall we say, a curriculum. So, but they come in with their issues and challenges. So let's say somebody is having a problem at home, or somebody's having an issue, a physical issue or financial. You know, other things I have to share. I know some people don't think of it this way, but finances show up in the auric field. Your career energy shows up in the auric field. How you're dealing with relationships shows up in the auric. All of it shows up in the auric field. So if there is a disturbance, and especially if I'm disturbed, like one of the things I think we have to remember, we're not always going to be in control of our what's going on in our life, but we are in control of how we handle what's going on in our life. So if, let's say, I've got a difficulty with a family member and I'm angry and upset, and well, that's going to create an energy in the aura that's not very pleasant. The chakras could be moving in a counterclockwise motion. So I've got some homework to do. I've got to straighten myself out, and then that will give me more strength to face the person. So what we try to help people do is empower them with their challenges and give them the tools. I'll give a quick example of this. We had a doctor in one of the classes, and you know, we have goals, personal goals, and he was trying to figure his. Said, well, you know, I to be honest with you, I don't show a lot of compassion for my patients. I see so many every day. It's just sort of in and out. And I like to joke sometimes doctors see patients like petri dishes, not people, right? And he realized I have to change that. It's not helping my practice. It's not good for me. And that meant he had to work with more compassion. Well, in the auric field, compassion comes in as this rose pink energy. So he started meditating with that, really bringing it in. And he had to be that compassionate person. He took more time with his patients, and he reported, "Oh my God, you know, not only are my patients loving it, but my practice is even busier than ever before." So he still had all the skills that he already had, but he was missing this very important component. And now he brought that into the picture, and he became basically a better doctor for it. You know, so those are the ways that we try to help people. As there was another lady, she had a literal, I forget what the name of the phobia is, but crossing bridges, you know, literally, she would become literally palpable, you know, when that happened, of fear, and she had to cross three bridges to get it to work. So she went to therapists, you know, all this. So again, bringing the energies in, working with it. Now, this was months. This was not like a 1 day treatment or anything. One day she said, I went to work and I forgot I'd even crossed those three bridges. It just had become a complete non-issue. So that's where the power to change. Another thing, perhaps just to share here very quick, is that one of the spiritual laws states is that if the energy to generate something in your life is in your auric field, it will manifest in your life. And if it's not in your auric field, well, you just got to build it up. We used to live in Los Angeles, you know, that's a very creative company town, and people would come and say, "Oh, am I going to be successful as a writer, a director, as an actor?" And sometimes the answer was, "Well, you haven't built enough creative power yet. You know, I mean, you've got to build more of that. The talent's not strong enough for what you're trying to achieve. So you got to sharpen your skills." And then that slowly starts to build the power, and then bingo, it hits sort of a like a critical mass point, and then that starts, showing up in your life. So if you're looking at your life and you're saying, oh, I'm really happy here, I'm not happy here, well, that just means you got to put more energy and focus there to try to turn that part of your life and make it more what you would like.
Well, let me pick up on one of the things you said just now, which is that you can perceive money relationship issues in the aura.
Right.
Now, you seem to be saying that when everything's all right, the aura is bright and clear, and things are not so great, the aura is murky in some way or another. The colors are
Yeah,
dulled.
exactly.
When you see that, I mean, can you actually specifically say, oh, that guy's got like this, kind of mustard yellow in his aura? Can you actually perceive that that's in fact about money or relationships? Can you perceive it that specifically?
Well, okay, let's talk about that for a moment because this is actually fascinating. So when we're bringing in or when we're expressing these energies, what we're actually doing is that the color is bringing in different facets of consciousness. So, in the as I'm sure you know, in the spiritual realms, consciousness is king, right? You can manifest things through the power of consciousness and the mind and the higher dimensions. So here, because we have the physical limitations, yes, we have the consciousness and the idea to do something, but then there's a lot of obviously external physical things we do to make it happen. But with something like prosperity, most of us think of it like how much money's in the bank, but actually, prosperity is first the state of consciousness. If you're in the consciousness of wealth, wealth will start to follow, right? Many stories of people that came to the town penniless and in short time amassed wealth because they had the consciousness to do it. They may not have called it that, but that's the way their mind was working. And in the auric field, that that consciousness of prosperity comes through as a brilliant turquoise light. So if you're seeing somebody with a lot of turquoise, hey, they're doing fine in that part of their life. Now, if it's completely vacant or very weak, or there's an avenue of prosperity in the heart center, and in some cases, you've seen where it can get actually a little gray. So that means yes. And that if you see that in that particular area, then you know that person's not handling that part of their life. There's something they're not handling right. They're getting into the poverty consciousness. They don't think they can do it. They don't think they can make it. Many people they get freaked out over money and they don't realize it's a skill like anything else. You have to abide by the laws. You can't say, "Oh, I'm such a good person. Why do I have?" Or such a spiritual person. Why do I have so many financial problems? Well, these are different departments of our life. It's all spiritual, but if finances is not your strong suit, then again, you've got to put your energy there. We tell especially our more advanced students, get your earth house in order so that you can build these higher spiritual, edifices in your life because it's all part of the divine life. If you see as prosperity as part of your divine life, then you're going to pursue it with greater zeal. Even Alice Bailey, when she was talking about the new day or the new age, she was saying it's going to take a lot of finances to do that. It's not going to be people just sitting around singing kumbaya. We're going to need the earth power resources to make these major spiritual transformations in the world. So yes, and the same with relationships. That if the this is a whole other area we could get into, but there's exchanges with other people, auric exchanges. So let's say there's a couple, but they're really not in love with each other. They're just more, maybe it's just a sexual thing, or it's something that brought them together, but it's not a real healthy relationship. Well, the exchange is going to be kind of this dull gray energy. It's not going to be a happy exchange, and it's not going to last very long. But if you see a more loving exchange and more harmonious, actually one of the most important things, let's say, about finding companionship is you want somebody compatible with you, right? What was it? Teilhard de Chardin said, love is not so much gazing into each other's eyes as looking in the same direction. So you want to be able to, that's really the quality. I know we get mesmerized sometimes by looks or other things that go on, but is that energetic flow between the two of us working in this positive way? And if it is, then obviously this is a very good situation. but yeah, those are all, it's fascinating how the, and even career, it's such a big part of our, how much time we spend on earth. Um, but career can often be connected to our purpose, how we're contributing to the greater good. And it brings in so many different skills and talents to pull it all together. But again, if anyone's confused, oh, what's my purpose here? Why am I even on this earth? There is a purpose. You came in here with a distinct purpose. If you're not clear what it is, keep seeking, right? Seek and you will find. The seeking of the philosopher's stone sets the condition to find it. Don't give up. Keep at it, and it will start to be revealed. That's part of the journey for you. And keep pursuing it. And that shows up also in the auric field as well. If you're strong in that career flow and strong in that, some people have the Midas touch, right? It seems whatever they put their hands on, they make it successful. Well, they earn that. They built that power. So if you don't see that as much in yourself, just say, I'll build it in myself. I'll make that a talent and skill and stick with it till you actually see it happen.
Well, let's go onto you and your personal subjective experience of auras. Um, well, in the first place, one clairvoyant I know describes it very much as something you turn on and off. She says, well, I'm not looking that way now. So she doesn't just see these things automatically. It's sort of she describes it sounds like kind of a switch she turns on when she wishes to perceive clairvoyantly. Is that more or less like your experience?
So I think the way to think of it too is, we're spiritual beings in a physical body, and our consciousness is tuned into the physical dimensions so we can function here, right? If we were not tuned in well, there could be a whole lot of problems. We may not even be able to survive here. So we need that physical focus. Now, if you have built that bridge a little bit to the spiritual worlds, or you have learned how to develop it. In my case, I had some, but it's 40 years of working with Barbara. Really taught a lot of stuff. You're building this inner bridge, but you can't keep it on all the time, or you wouldn't be able to function here. One of the first times I had a really kind of one of these very exalted states, I was with Barbara, and afterwards it was thrilling. And I just said, I said, we talked about it, and she explained a little bit more what was going on. I said, gee, I just want to be there all the time. He said, oh, if you were there all the time, you just go out of your body. You wouldn't be grounded. One of the things that's very important is we want to tell people that if they are having some clairvoyant experiences or things, that you want to make sure you keep your feet on the ground. If any time you ever start to feel like what they call it the space cadet or anything like that, something else is going on, because the true mystical experiences are exalting, but they don't take you away from reality. Before I met Barb and started training, I was having all these experiences in consciousness, but at the time I didn't know what it was. I didn't even know what metaphysics was at that time, but I just knew I was in this wonderful, it was, amazing kind of place. And it came by itself, it left by itself, and it got so strong, it led to an actual, a really, I call it my Saul on the road to Damascus moment. It was a strong, and even then I didn't have the language for it. When I realized it was metaphysics, then I couldn't get enough of it. And yes, I lived in Los Angeles. I went to Manly Pial. I was reading some of the Theosophical books. I was doing all the things you do when you have your awakening. And fortunately, I met Barbara about a year later. And then I recognized her that very first night as my teacher. Yeah. And I will say this, as much as you can do, and we have to do our own spiritual growing, and there's a lot we do on our own. But at a certain point, we can only do so much on our own. I tell people I could have read every metaphysical book in the Library of Congress or meditated 8 hours a day. I would have not gotten even close to what I got with those years with Barbara, because just it's the ancient, teacher student, the guru chela relationship. It's from the beginning of time. I remember reading somewhere Helena Blavatsky, for all her groundbreaking work, she regretted that she started her esoteric school late, because this takes time to develop. When I first met Barbara, yeah, I was clearly a student. Even then, I was helping her in her work. But then when it started to realize that she was training me to sort of carry on the work, that was still a long journey. And the training she gave early in clairvoyance and things of that, that went on for quite some time because, again, you have to be ready for this, right? You have to, it's a gentle kind of building up, and then it gets you to this extraordinary place. And maybe one thing I was preparing for this, and it came in to talk about this today, if it's okay for a moment, Richard, um, that as fascinating it is, let's say, to have, let's say, talking about Barbara for a moment, she was clairvoyant from almost age 3. She got her first training at age 11 from a hermetic scientist, and then real, even more serious training in her 20s and 30s. It's fascinating to that, but let's say her greatest gift and what she really left us to do was that, the connection with the higher. When you're really teaching, it's not just you sharing, oh, I see this or I see that. You're really working with, in a mystical way now, not in a psychic way. You're really connecting with the higher powers, and they're kind of doing the guiding and the directing of it. And that's what she really trained me to do, to be able to carry on this work, is to build that connection. Blavatsky, I had, as she called her Mahatmas, whatever, that there's this direct link that builds you, and that's what we call the mystery school tradition. And that's the most important. It was funny, we would promote her in the early days, and when we promoted her as a spiritual teacher, okay, we'd get people, oh, an aura specialist. The aura was just more fascinating, so it attracted more people. But her greatest gift was really being a spiritual teacher, and all the work, all the books we wrote, everything flowed from that well. And continuing now, because she spent many, many years, preparing me for what I'm doing now. And I just feel eternally grateful to her. She passed on last year, at almost made it to 95. She was working almost to her last night. So talk about going with your boots on. I hope when it's my time, I do the same thing. But just such a great example of what it is to live that life. I'm reminded now, someone said about Helena Blavatsky, where, there was a little time, sometimes she had I guess, a fiery personality. And they said, you're expecting someone like her to be just like you, but having more talent. That's not how it works. When they're on these other levels of consciousness, there's a whole different mechanism going on here. And part of the mystery is just understanding how that whole perception works. And that's part of the mystery of the spiritual journey.
Um, could you tell me a little bit more about Barbara, who she was and her background?
Yes, it's wonderful. Barbara Y. Martin, we've written all the books together, the course materials, all of it really. Um, so Barbara was basically born clairvoyant. From age 3, she was seeing auras, although she didn't understand what the colors meant. She knew I'm attracted to someone that has these pretty energies, but detracted when someone has these more menacing looking. And she said sometimes she'd see her parents arguing a little bit, and she would see the discordant energy between them, and it wasn't always pleasant to see these colors. As a matter of fact, if I can share one quick story, her father was a Greek Orthodox priest, and he was a builder of churches. And so they would go all around the country to take the family. This was during the Depression era, building up these churches. And one time they were inaugurating a big cathedral, and the archbishop was there. And he was, in his regalia, and little 4-year-old Barbara was watching the aura of this archbishop. And instead of seeing these beautiful energies, she saw these menacing colors, right? But the bishops on either side had these beautiful pearl luster colors. Now, at the end of the service, when it came time to kiss his hand, as they do in the church there. Again, this is the prominent family in front of the whole congregation. Little 4-year-old Barbara screamed out, "I'm not kissing his hand. He's a monster. He eats children." And it was the beginning of, she got the spanking for it. She learned quickly, I got to keep quiet about this. Then around 11 years old, they were in Kansas City, Missouri. Again, the father building a new church there. And she was in a theater group. The theater stock in those days was very popular. And there was a well-known woman that was leading it. One day she told Barbara, would you come in on a Saturday? I want to talk to you privately. And Barbara thought, oh, she's going to dump me. She doesn't like my acting. She went in there, and then Dorothy asked her these questions like, well, how do you see things? She says, what do you mean? I see normal. No, how do you see things? And then little Barbara goes, oh, she's talking about that. And then finally the woman blurted out, you can see the aura, can't you? And Barbara's jaw dropped. She said, I didn't even know it was called the aura, right? And then the woman said, I'm a Hermetic scientist. I can see the aura too. My grandmother and great-grandmother are also Hermetic scientists. And I want to teach you a little bit about what your skill, your art, what you possess. So she'd come in there quietly every Saturday, and Dorothy had these ancient, these old handwritten books. Unfortunately, you can't buy them on Amazon, that would clearly spell out, for example, the definition of the colors. So now she could interpret, oh, that means this, that means that, that means that, and many other things. It was a very eye-opening experience for her. Then they had to leave because they moved to California, where the father was building a church in Pasadena and Bakersfield, and this was during the golden age of Hollywood. This is when the big icons were up there, right? In the early, I guess it would be early 40s. And so at first she thought, oh, I'm going to be involved in showbiz, and actually went very well. She was building up this whole variety show that was getting very successful, but then she was already in touch. She was trying to almost push away some of this talent, but it just kept coming back. And then she got the message from the higher, no, this is not your destiny. You're meant to be a teacher. So then she started a whole different phase of her work. Again, this is long before this was a popular thing to do. And eventually she met another teacher, Inez, and this woman prepared her to go on the public platform. She didn't go on it herself. This was another advanced mystic in Los Angeles. But she told Barbara, you're going to get on the public platform. You're going to bring this to larger groups of people. And again, Barbara almost didn't believe it because, again, the circle she was in, they were not understanding what she was doing. But that's exactly what happened. And she became one of the true pioneers, one of the first to get on a lecture platform and talk about the aura in depth and in those modern times there. And then I met her when I came to California to pursue entertainment, interestingly enough, in motion pictures. And I had my awakening, and then I met her a year later, and we kind of knew right away, even beyond just me being her student, that somehow I was meant to be part of the work. And then it took some time, but after a while I said, Barbara, you got all, you're teaching all inspirationally. You got all these notes. We got to organize all this, and then we wrote the book, Change Your Aura was the first one. It was the flagship, and then started the Institute. And we've been at it ever since. It's been, I have to say, I completely changed my life direction. I moved away from movies and into this. It was just, I couldn't do both. I tried for a while, but I like to say, movies is a jealous mistress. It wants all of you. And my heart was now, and I realized this is really what I want to do more than the other. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's fascinating. Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about the aspect of your work that does involve aura healing.
Oh, yes,
Um,
yes.
so what I seem to understand from what you're saying is that the aura is, in a way, a means of diagnosis. You see certain things in an aura, and this points to certain things that may need to be remedied, right?
Right. That's
So,
a part of it.
so then how do people go about remedying the deficiencies?
Right. Right. So now I'm going to be clear, and Barbara used to say this too. I'm not a doctor. I don't diagnose. You don't want to visit me in jail. But yes, if there's a gray around an organ, you better have it checked. Right. Um, uh, so what we try to do is, again, in our training classes, is teach people how to heal with the auric field. So we know we need air to breathe. We know we need food to eat, and we need to drink. Without these things, the body could not function. But if the spiritual support system that was literally holding the very atoms of our body together, if that was withdrawn for even a moment, the body would just disintegrate. So the spiritual component is fueling the health of the body. So when the body is distressed, there's a spiritual distress that's going on. Either it caused it, there was a spiritual disturbance from the beginning, or it's the result of a physiological problem. Either way, the spiritual energies can help. We like to say there's three causes of illness, physical, spiritual, and karmic. These can cause physical distresses in the body. And you can apply the same spiritual tools because there's also three methods of healing. There's the medical, the holistic, and the spiritual. Now, thank God, spiritual energy healing is much more popular today than it has been before, right? Now we understand, oh, okay, I can direct energy either to myself, or if I learn the skill, I can do it on behalf of another person. So there's an aura related to the health of the body, and even each organ has its own little energy flow. So for example, the liver, which is such a vital organ, when it's very healthy and vibrant, it'll have kind of an orangey red light around it. Now, if it's distressed, if there's a problem, if there's a disease in the liver, it can start to weaken and go to a gray. Gray can be the color of illness in the auric field. So I would want to, well, first of all, I'd want to go to a doctor and have it checked. Don't try to just figure it all out on your own. But I'd want to direct the healing light into the liver to build up that healing power and to get it moving the way it needs to. Now, I'm very cautious about sharing the success stories in healing because you can never guarantee what an outcome will be in healing. But I come from a medical family. My father was a doctor, my brother's a doctor. So I understand the medical world very well. When I started with Barbara, I helped her in her healings. And to give you an example, this one woman had a brain tumor deep inside the brain. It was inoperable, basically. And she was still quite young. Um, but she had this real determination that through, meditation, through the healings, she could help this. And she was a little again, she was a little clairvoyant herself, so she could see the healing power coming in. So for her, there was no guesswork. She knew it existed. Well, this was months, of doing this, going multiple healings, her own work, her own positive mindset that I'm gonna, picturing all the health. She did her homework. She went back for MRI, and the doctors couldn't believe it. The tumor had shrunk down to basically nothing, and they couldn't figure out what was going on, right? So I like to share this wasn't just the healings, it was her proactive approach, because just like we said, prosperity is first a consciousness, healing is first a state of consciousness, right? The great healer of the 1950s, Joel Goldsmith, would say, I get into a state of consciousness where illness does not exist. And when I did that, generally the person felt some type of relief. Now, he said it took him 13 years to get to that stage. But that's, again, consciousness. It's moving in consciousness, and that consciousness can work even in your physical body. And it's so essential, especially today with all the stresses we're under right now. We can take a healthy body, put it under stress, and yeah, it's going to get diseased. So we gotta manage all this and our thoughts. Now, New Thought movement taught us mind over matter, right? That our thinking can directly affect the health of our body. And now with the 21st century, with energy medicine, we understand it's mind over matter plus spiritual energy to bring about the healing that we need. It's a cornerstone of our work at the Institute. Healing is fundamental because we all need healing. We all need healing at some point in our life of something, whether it's physical, mental, emotional. So we like to say the principles of healing are the principles of healthy living and knowing how to really live in that vibrancy and well-being.
Great, thank you. Well, the subjects of karma and reincarnation have come up a couple of times in our conversation. So maybe you could talk about how these subjects relate to the kind of work you do.
I'm sure to this audience, it's no news that this is not our first lap on Earth, and probably not our last lap on Earth. So the idea of reincarnating is an accepted understanding here. But the way to think of it is, well, the motto at our institute is helping souls grow. So we're helping to facilitate the evolutionary process that every single soul is going under. And from our point of view, when you've had the awakening, it means you're supposed to take a more accelerated. Everybody's growing, but when you're more aware of it and you realize there is that greater life to attain to, then it means you're supposed to pursue it, right? Now, again, this is not a journey of a single incarnation. So why are we reincarnating? Yes, we're coming in to finish unfinished business. If I didn't handle things well in one lifetime, I've got to clean it up in a future lifetime. But we're also coming in to grow. The way to think of it is you could be the best first grader, straight A, whatever it is. You're not ready for college. You're going to go to second grade, maybe third. So each lap on earth is bringing more knowledge, but you can't experience it all in a lifetime. For example, we've been male and female. Well, we're going to need a lifetime for that. We've been to different races. Theosophy covered a lot of big stuff here when they started talking about things like the root races and the cycles. These were big, big topics to realize race is not just biological, race is spiritual, right? So we have to experience these different races it's part of the soul's growth. So the Bible says, there's a time for everything under the sun. So we have to experience all this. The soul is enriched by it lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And eventually we reach that state of perfection. That's the ultimate goal of reincarnation. And again, I seem to be quoting Blavatsky a lot today. I loved her quote when they asked her about, well, what do you do when you reach that state of perfection? And she goes, is it over? And kind of like you're playing harps on clouds all day long. No. She said you grow from perfection to perfection. So the journey never stops. So yes, we're on the most exciting journey there is. And I guess I was going to leave today with one thing is that, keep making your spiritual growth an even higher priority in your life. It's not accidental that it happened. And as you keep building it up, it takes you to extraordinary places.
Well, I think it went very well. Thank you so much for taking your time. It's been a pleasure and an education to talk to you. So I'm sure our viewers will agree. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks again, Richard. Much appreciated.